Hey everybody, it's Mark Thompson, and this is the Chief Executive Summit. We've had the pleasure for the last 2 decades of talking with executives about how to take their leadership to the next level. CEOs, CXOs, COOs, people who are leading organizations and who have major impact. And so I have the pleasure as a CEO coach to talk to these leaders and to the thought leaders, inventors, scientists, engineers, philosophers, people who are having the biggest impact on organizational change and leadership today. And a dear friend of mine, Tom Gruber, is with us today. I have found myself thinking about your first TED Talk, I think, Tom, many times now about how you seeded a revolution. It's been a decade now, and you were part of the founding team of creating a service that now is used 1.5 billion times a day, and now is hitting this next generation of leadership and creating a new level of inquiry that I'd love to ask you about today. Tell us about how you think about that last decade, and something we weren't even talking about what seems like months ago is now kind of an obsession that we can all participate in.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see what's happened in the last 10 years or so. You know, Siri was the first mainstream AI experience for most people.
Yes.
And it was, I guess, it's what we call the big think, small screen metaphor. Like we could put it on the phone, network connection, we could get the cloud services, the big servers in the cloud to do interesting things. And then, of course, the technology was much different than today. But the idea, essentially, you want this interactive conversational interface. And what's happened is the dream is coming true. We're actually having conversational interfaces now that are really fulfilling the expectation that they can go on and on and on. They can understand context. They can address things in whatever language you use. That's really exciting. The interesting thing is that that metaphor is still there. And so it's the back end that's really changed. The cloud part of it is now gotten much, much bigger and much more complicated. And so and you know, it's been really fun to see what the industry has now, the excitement has created in industry. Obviously, people see these demos or they play with ChatGPT and they go, "Wow, this thing is amazing." Now the imagination starts to kick in, and this is the phase. This is the conversation that we find ourselves in a lot now. What is possible, both upside and downside?
Well, when you think about this, then when you were imagining creating something that wasn't even something I think I could visualize or anyone else, what led you to the point of that step, that dramatic step that you took to enable the power of this? Because it unlocked a lot of capacity for people to be able to participate and learn from and use the services, the Library of Alexandria, in a sense. How did you think about that led up to that point?
Yeah, well, AI's people, I've been doing it since the early 80s.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen the ups and downs, the hype cycles and everything, but AI people have always been thinking about intelligent assistants. It wasn't a Siri idea. It wasn't our novel idea. In fact, in 1987, Apple has a video called the Knowledge Navigator video, which famously shows like a talking head. This guy had a little bow tie and he talked on what looked like an iPad. It didn't exist yet. They used something that looked like an internet that didn't exist yet. But the vision has been around. What the Siri team realized was that was the time. 2008 was the year to do it. At that point, the data, we had the elastic cloud, which means we could basically have the illusion of infinite compute in a little tiny startup. We had this amazing smartphone, the iPhone 1 had just been put together, and by the time we shipped it was iPhone 2 or 3. So we now had a reasonable user interface. And they solved all the problem of the connections with the cell phone companies and so on. So all of a sudden, everybody had an interface in their hand. They could talk to the big guy in the cloud. And that was, and we also knew that this mobile revolution, we were kind of betting the mobile thing was going to happen. And it was a good bet because that said that we're going to have data with mobile users. And once we have the data, we'll get the flywheel started and we can start actually seeing improvements in quality.
Right. When you think about Siri, I don't think most people even to this day realize it was you and your co-founders who created this company, and it was acquired by Apple. Could you talk about that step there? Because people, of course, have always had a fascination with Apple, and they wouldn't have known that you would have brought this, at the time, outrageous idea to them.
Yeah, I mean, it was a VC's dream. We had a great time walking up and down Sand Hill Road asking for money because that basically said people were competing for it because it was such a great time. Everyone sort of said, "Yes, you guys can actually build this now. Yes, we want it." Um, and so we built it with 24 people in 2 years, and it was amazing. When in fact, a few weeks after we posted it on the App Store, Steve Jobs gave us a call. So it was a really wonderful road. Now the VCs immediately told us, don't sell, don't sell, don't sell. This is our 100x play, man. That's why we're in business for guys like you. And we actually had to kind of reverse pitch them. And we said, look, this is an opportunity for the founders to have impact on hundreds of millions of people. You don't get that chance more than once in life.
Mm.
And so, by joining forces with Steve, he's like, I'll do the business, you do the product. And it was like, that was a great bargain.
What was that conversation like? Could you share what that must have been a bit of a back and forth because you were going to be seduced by others' sense of riches in another direction rather than instant impact on hundreds of millions.
Well, Steve is as good a negotiator as you've heard. He's amazing. He started out really low. He started out by basically cold calling our cell phones and then saying, "Hey, it's Steve." And we're like, "Yeah, sure, you're Steve." And then eventually we believed it was Steve. And then, he kept calling back and talking with Doug, our CEO, and negotiating, came in low and kept trying to anchor the price down. And we talked to the board, and the board's like, "That's way too low." And then and he kept coming back, and then eventually they figured out how to lock it into a certain place. And then the terms. He was an amazingly charming, sales guy, right? I mean, he brought us to his home. The three founders. We sat there for 3 hours. There's an Ansel Adams on the wall. This is a beautiful setting. And he's like, asking our advice about things and sharing his thoughts on things like Find My Family was called back then, Find My Friends. It was not a feature yet. I was like, what do you think about this? How will that play? What about Yelp? What do you think about Yelp? And these kind of things. It was really, really, we realized we could work with him. And we didn't really have any, in that moment, didn't really realize how powerful he was and how much he could move mountains. And so the second part was, once we got to Apple, he put a cocoon around us. He said, make those guys successful. And then that made it possible. Because what I've learned since then is working in large corporations in acquisitions, most of them fail. Most of them fail because of the internal structure, organizational structure, and alignment of people in the corporation. It's just natural. In Steve's company, if Steve said make it happen, it happened. And even if he wasn't physically there because he was very ill, and that was really cool because how else are you going to embed a tiny startup's app into the operating system of your flagship product in 1 year? That was kind of amazing.
That's so mind-blowing to me for all the reasons you just described. Silos in big companies are created so that they usually can scale pretty quickly. And then the bureaucracy makes it impossible for them ever to adapt to innovation or to bring in ideas like this one. And so you were able, it was already a big universe to play in already.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of what I learned. I stayed at Apple. My two co-founders left and built a competitor, actually, and sold it to Samsung. And that was also a great journey. They wanted to, Adam Chire in particular, wanted to explore the back end of Siri product. How do you integrate with all the APIs and applications? I was more interested in the front end. And as a sort of user experience person, I'm like, this is my opportunity. I mean, how else am I going to have such a short path between what we're doing? So I stayed and worked. Ran an advanced development group to create all the features, prototype all the features and things that you might want to put in AI products.
Right.
But I did what I was always good at, which was, research, R&D, managing PhD type people, this sort of thing. And I ran into, a corporate environment, which is not my thing. And so, even Apple was such an amazing place, but it was still a corporation.
Right.
And that means that the incentives are all over the place. And it took me several years to figure out who the Machiavellians were, who were the great people to trust and all that. And at that time I was already like, this is crazy. But the opportunity to have that kind of impact was just, thrilling.
When you think about the evolution that you'd had in your career prior to that point, being a Stanford professor and so forth, what do you wish you knew at the time you started to make these choices in your career as an executive and for a person like yourself who loves to have impact, and you've always been an entrepreneur? What do you wish you knew earlier in your career that is something you know today? like what you just described in terms of being able to have the agency within a big organization to really pursue the development of a new idea?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, I was not a professor, I was a research scientist, but a
Right.
staff person at Stanford with PhD students and research grants and all that. But the main thing is, yeah, all through those careers, starting from, graduate school, then Stanford, and then three companies, Siri was the third,
Right.
entrepreneur companies. In each case, I realized later that my kind of driving North Star was impact, human impact.
Mm.
If I could do it again, I would realize that sooner. I would say if I started from, like at Stanford, I was making $50,000 a year annual salary.
Oh, that's killer stuff,
The
especially
Palo
with
Alto area.
faculty housing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so like I had to make some money, make consulting or whatever. I had to get out and start a company or something because that's what they do at Stanford. But I wasn't obsessed with the money. I just needed to make enough so I could live in the Bay Area. But if I had realized that plus impact was really the more important motivator.
Mm.
And so with impact being a goal, it changes the way you organize your life. So that would mean, for example, I would teach myself leadership skills that the kind you're working with earlier, like because you can't do really big things about yourself,
Right.
obviously,
Right.
you know. And so I was always kind of the idea guy, the inventor, the product dude, but not the leader of a whole bunch of people that would execute. And if I had more of that earlier, I would have been able to do more of the leadership myself. Because when I didn't succeed, it was often because I didn't partner with a person who could lead the way we need, or I just didn't recruit the right colleagues, to do the big vision fast enough. And so that would change things. I think young people now, you can see that they can realize that there's a lot of ways to make money, and the key thing is to do something that other people find compelling and interesting, not just because it's a way of making money. Like do something that's fun, that's impactful, that's meaningful, and then everything is an increasing returns cycle. Then it becomes easier to recruit good people, easier to align them and to motivate them to do cool things, to have them reach, even to be able to pitch for money nowadays. These days, it's easier to pitch. I represent a lot of these companies that I advise. It's much easier to talk the high impact story than the high money story these days.
Mm. Talk more about that and how, as you think about scaling organizations, the world that I live in is very much around trying to think about how to build the bench and develop that succession pipeline. And it always comes down to your point, which is meaning matters more than ever. And it does to this generation, but it does to humanity, to every generation wishes they could have more impact and that they could better manage the meaning in their lives and the way they participate in having impact. What would be your advice for a CEO these days in thinking about AI and thinking about the workforce? Do you have observations about how you think about that today?
Well, yeah, these days everyone's talking about that in the context of the AI technological wave that's happening, right? Of course, picking a business is already you do it for your own reasons. You want to be in this vertical or that, and your role in it. That I can't give you general advice about that. But once we start bringing AI in, we started seeing there are these sort of ethical or governance things that are kind of tangible now.
Mm-hmm.
You can start from, you mentioned the TED Talk in 2017 that gave this was about introducing the idea of humanistic AI,
Yes.
which says you basically have a choice when you're doing an AI project or doing research or doing investment, that you can either celebrate the machine learning as its own thing, like, gee, look, it competes with humans on these scales. It's better than humans that go, or whatever. Or you can make a thing that says, hey, this enables humans to do what humans love to do much, much better. And and that ends, if you take that second path, it changes your tactics. It means you're going to build applications that are more augmentative rather than automating, and more collaborative rather than competing. And now as a leader, so you choose what kind of project, what kind of research, what kind of investment to do. And then you say, well, my high impact is going to be, say, building a system that can help people solve these human needs. So these days, I'm in a group of angels that were really interested in new startups that have AI and high tech, biotech, and other things to help with mental health care, because it's a massively underserved problem. 1 billion people in the world have untreated mental health care. And there's not enough humans in the world to sit down in a psychiatrist's bench with 1 billion people. It's just not gonna, the old way doesn't work. So we're just struggling to find what kind of ways can we use the impact, but we start from the problem of mental health care, not the problem of, say, a brain interface as a technology.
I see.
Technology is cool, but it doesn't get you out of the bed like I could help 1 billion people.
Right. That's huge. When you think about the challenges faced then about how to channel for collaboration as opposed to just competition within an organization, what's so interesting to me is, I just have a recent MBA graduate, and it's interesting to still see how, they're teaching at Stanford and everywhere else, a set of programs where it's very individualistic. It's about your performance. It's keep your eyes on your paper. And it's not really until you get later in your development and later in your learning that all of a sudden you get pointed back to the fact that nobody gets anything worthwhile done alone. And then by the time we get to a company, we're trying to get those brightest scholars and high standardized test score individuals working in groups. Now you're developing AI. How do you feel like that ends up being a collaborative tool? Because you talked about how it's not just artificial intelligence, it's augmented intelligence.
Oh, in the very near future, we're all going to have a team of AI agents working for us. And because they're not going to replace their jobs, they're going to replace job functions or job tasks of various kinds. In some cases, we already see it. Like you go to a Zoom meeting, every once in a while, people have like an AI in there that's taking notes.
Yes.
And recording, transcribing, taking notes. Now that's already mainstreamed, and it's amazing. That was actually a high-tech thing that DARPA was paying big money for 15 years ago.
15 years ago, yes.
Yeah. Well, the Kalo project, that was one of their use cases, is how would you do that? And so the whole that's been, well, how does that work? Do we fire one of the team members because now we have a note-taking AI? No, usually not. But there's a lot of places where you need to accommodate that. We haven't really absorbed culturally yet what that means. If we're starting to record every meeting and transcribe every meeting, that means everything we say and think and do is discoverable, which is kind of a big thing. But it also means if you turn around the other way, there's the knowledge management potential is huge. You could learn from the whole organization at scale if we actually share this information properly. So we take these even simple steps like that. We think through in the system level, how's that change the way humans work together? And we're going to see more and more that say we have, like, you might have this team of AIs and they're brainstorming things. And you might say, well, what did this particular customer view on this product idea? You ask the AI to simulate that point of view. And so now we may actually be reviewing focus groups of AIs, looking at our product. And how's that going to blow the minds of some marketing people, right? Everything is now it's not that it's replacing person X in job Y. It's more about rethinking how we accomplish our work and what parts of those could be done with the new AI systems.
Well, it seems to me, it feels like, we learned to use a slide rule, maybe at the very beginning. I don't know if you did.
I did.
It is faster with my, reverse Polish HP 10C. And then the various generations of calculators. It didn't replace me. It just created a higher expectation of what we as individuals, I think, need to be able to deliver, and maybe the velocity at which we're working. Talk about what that means for culture, and what kind of responsibilities that we might have in terms of those.
I like your metaphor. I'm going to run with your metaphor of the slide rule, because most people don't know what they even do anymore. But slide rule is kind of a multiplier adder machine. It's got an abacus kind of machine. It's an analog computer, basically.
I would think it's like an
abacus. Yeah, it's like an abacus for Western engineers. The only thing that's weird about it is you cannot use the abacus. So you can't use the slide rule effectively unless you have order of magnitude reasoning in your head.
Yeah.
So it gives you like the decimal, the numbers, but it doesn't give you, how many 10 to the X. It doesn't tell you
the mighty decimal point in your brain.
Exactly. So you have to be able to roughly estimate, okay, I'm doing this math, this multiplication. So when we use AI, we have to have a similar thing. We have to have sort of the equivalent of critical thinking or, sense making that puts the particular generative thing in context.
Okay.
So we have to be able to say, like, first of all, I asked this thing a question. It's not a search engine. It's just going to generate some nonsense back to me. It may be nonsense. It might be true. We know it doesn't know the difference. Right. It doesn't have any idea to know what it's talking about and whether it's true or not. We are responsible for that. And so we have to put that in context. And even things like, let's generate a whole bunch of images or a whole bunch of text and see which ones work. Again, we have to put them in the context of, well, these are being generated by machine. It doesn't know a lot of things about human culture. It just imitates language play. And then keep that in mind. Now, it doesn't mean we can't use it. It just means that we always have to keep that order of magnitude or that sense-making context in mind when using it. And that's especially true with job displacement kinds of things, where there are some industries which are really ripe for outright job displacement, and most of them are in job augmentation. So even in that world of like marketing, advertising, say, I'm starting to work with generative image generation now as part of my making slides. And it is amazing now how I can do hundreds of iterations on really cool visual ideas, which I would take a day turnaround with a designer who's I'm paying big money to do just one,
Right.
So it's kind of amazing. I still hire the designer, by the way, because he's better at the generative AI than I am, so it's interesting. But also that the whole workflow of advertising and image generation, it is that the actual idea of generating a ton of images and evaluating them, that you can change how you do the process, but it doesn't change the whole system, which is, make a wild guess about what your market might be, have a bunch of ideas about how to position things, try a bunch of things, test them, and then iterate, right? That life cycle is still going to be around. It's just going to be automated in different ways. And in the human, in judgment about what kind of product to build and so on, it really isn't going to be something you just ask an LLM to tell you. It's going to be something that you have to understand as a human.
When you think about the skills that are needed to develop this prompt engineering frame of reference, that contextual coach for the AI and for the team, are there emerging, and I'm being reductionist here in terms of looking for tips. What are ways that you would think that an executive should think about the prompt engineering piece so that you can optimize for every individual being kind of the best and highest use of themselves? I had an interview recently. I do coaching with a chief executive of a Fortune 500. Well, I'll actually say it. It was Kraft Heinz, and they're doing a succession plan, and he's now becoming chairman. And I said, "Is it okay if I'm running AI while we have this conversation? I can check my work, I can check my own IP, and I can also check what else is going on there." And he said, "I just wish my doctor would do that. I wish my lawyer would do that. I wish every other professional services person. I'm not firing you because you did it. Now I'm just having somebody keeping you honest, Mark." How should we think about this in that regard?
So yeah, I mean, as an executive, you already are in the business of running a team of agents. They're just human agents. So you can use that skill to understand how to delegate to AI, how to monitor. When you have a new person on the team, you calibrate them. What are they good at? What are they fast and slow at? What can you count on them for? What can you trust them to be competent at, and what you can't?
Nice.
All those skills you already have as a leader are going to happen when you start incorporating AI into your workflow. The interesting thing is now you have to teach the organization how to do this. So in fact, when people ask me what do young people need to know about the AI, how to use AI, I don't talk about prompt engineering per se. I talk about things like delegation management, coordination of results, and especially critical thinking. Because if you have basically a used car salesman in the room, on your team, and he's always just giving you whatever you want to hear, you need to know that it's a used car salesman and it's not your trusted engineer. And you still allow them in the room because diversity is good and that kind of thing, but you calibrate and you position. And that's what the UIs are now. They're effectively BS machines that are effective at generating ideas and generating perspectives. So, but I think that's the issue for leaders, really. We have to avoid the easy automation step. Like, okay, let's say that we have this, we're doing this with medical care. Okay? You can have a transcription that's, 95% accurate, but it gets something wrong, it's important. You can't do that. You have to, for medical, reasons, make sure that every key point that's put in the, say, patient note is accurately reviewed by a human in some way, right?
Right.
So now you have to design new workflow, new processes to do the mix. And that's actually kind of the new skill for the industry is, and this is going to be true of any kind of like heavy labor intensive thing like call centers, all these things now where they're going to start obviously moving AI into do a lot of things. Any task that's basically language input, language output, particularly with a relatively small domain,
Yeah.
like call centers, help centers, product support, even sales. These things are all going to have massive AI presence in them, but there's going to be human oversight. And so the skill set has to change and the organizational processes have to change to make the most use of the people left. I mean, I'll give you an example, like another metaphor for what these new chatbots are kind of like for us. Is most executives use consultants at some point. You might have your Price Waterhouse or McKinsey or KPMG or somebody. They might come in and they'll pack the room with hourly people, taking your requirements and come back, and then a week later or a month later you get your little report, right? Now, that can be done by AIs pretty fast now.
Yeah.
You can
just
say
want to feedback what you heard.
Yeah, exactly, with a lot of bullet points and charts and graphs. Now, the reason why they can do that is because most of that actual that generative stuff that the consultants or analysts are doing, they have the new people, they just get out of Harvard, MIT, whatever. They have the new smart kid who's got education but doesn't have any business experience or life experience, and they say, read all this stuff and analyze and summarize. And then they do. Well, AIs can do that because that's what they have. AIs have no life experience, but they've read 1,000,000 lifetimes of words.
Yes.
So they're really good at this kind of thing. But then, when you start charging more for that consultant is when they have business experience. And so then you don't give that to the AI because it doesn't have the business experience. It couldn't, unless it could read all the, all the Harvard Business Journal reports or whatever. But it essentially doesn't have the experience that the executives do. So that'll be one of the last things to automate is things that are learned from work experience.
Right.
So that's the key. It's like it's a new technology. It doesn't replace humans per se, but it does replace these functions that humans do. And so that means that your new Harvard grad is already going to come with the AI under his or her arm as a tool. And so now the expectation can be do the work of 3 or 4 of those new people, because we know you can automate a ton of that. But we want you to quickly step up to the person who can delegate, manage, coordinate, and make critical sense of the output of the AI.
Makes perfect sense. And it's a multiplier. And if we think about it as that augmentation, then maybe it'll be a faster track, but maybe it's also fewer people who are able to take that track. Now that you are traveling the world talking about AI, more than a decade later, and are very much a person, you started this conversation saying that you're very much driven by impact, and you care deeply about the implications of the revolution that you helped start. Could you share with us a few thoughts about what would you like for the layperson, an executive, to know about what our responsibility and accountability is, and what impact really means based on what you know, and that you'd like us to carry away with us?
Yes, you can have a lot of impact with AI, and it can be unintentionally good or bad, as well as intentionally good or bad. Most people don't do intentionally bad things, but we do a lot of things intentionally for one goal, but have an unintended consequence for another. So the most easy and glaring example is not large language model AI, but it's already a last generation AI that labeled data, optimized supervised learning data. That class of AI is the most prominently deployed AI out still. And this is what drove the social media addiction. So in just 5 years, the social media companies addicted like 1 billion to 2 billion people to use this stuff for 1 to 4 hours a day. It's the most effective addiction machine ever made in history, more than any casino or anything. And this was a direct consequence of using AI models on user data to optimize for engagement. And it's very clear, there's no argument about this. And there was only one goal, which was engagement. So the AI did a really good job. It just did engagement really well. And that means addiction of 1 billion people. Okay? Now, if we have when we ever do AI, it's a powerful tech. So if you want to get good at one thing, you have that unintended consequence. Social media addiction has caused all kinds of harms. No, you need to go into them. But whenever you do even a project at less scale than that, you're going to have a consequence of the optimization that AI can do. So the supervised learning AI is always optimized towards an objective function. And then you actually own, as an executive, the optimization criteria. You do it with humans, you give them KPIs and bonuses,
Right.
right? So those KPIs and bonuses get reflected all the way down into the objective functions of computer AI systems that are now doing these models. Now, it's not exactly the same with large language
Oh,
models,
right.
but it's similar. They're not quite as optimizing machines, but they have a different risk to consider, which is they don't know what they're talking about and we can't predict them. So that means that they will go off the rails. So you have to, and you know this now. There's no excuse not to know this. They hallucinate, they confabulate, and they cannot be controlled by simple rules. People try to put these guardrails on them. Simple guardrails don't work. So it's a hard problem, and you own it. So the problem is to make sure you know it's coming. And if you're going to deploy AI in an operational system, understand the boundaries, the risks, what are the mitigation strategies if something goes wrong, and so on. And if you know it ahead of the time, then you're going to be okay. Yeah, hopefully, unless something really comes out of the blue. But if you, for example, just let the end user, your customer, say anything to the AI and have it say anything back, you're going to end up with PR disasters because it's going to ask for stuff and say crazy things. But there are ways you can kind of control that conversation so they don't go off the rails.
It sounds to the first thing that hit me when you said this was I was thinking about the very brightest, youngest talent that I've helped bring into organizations, or even the as you said, the genius graduate students that you brought in, and it's humans are equally able to hallucinate, mislead, and reference wrong data. So it feels like that may be one of the most frightening human dimensions, I guess, of thinking more carefully about what really are the practical guardrails, because you also have that problem with humans as well, thinking about how can you actually implement those frameworks that allow behaviors that you're looking to repeat and that you don't mind getting repeated in public, as you said, with PR disasters and all the rest. So I'm not sure that everyone has thought about being as thoughtful as you're describing in thinking about what to build and bake in and what to calibrate for in terms of risks as you operate some of those.
I mean, the problem with large language models today is they're so seductive. Even very well-educated, very smart executives see a demo or play around with ChatGPT, and you say, wow, this thing, seems smart and seems to know a lot. But you can't generalize from that it knows things in a different domain. That's an actual error of thought. It's a mistake. It's a statistically inappropriate judgment, whatever you want to call it. It's a risky thing to do. So, but that's going to be easy to do. Just like, the classic thing, I'm sure in your management, Mark, you've talked to people about this, this sort of, well, the culture of we got to measure it in order to manage it. But then, we end up managing the stuff that's easy to measure, which isn't necessarily the important
it's the easy stuff to measure. Yes.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And if you do the same thing with AI, you're gonna have the AI, hey, it's optimizing for the easy to track stuff, but maybe not the important stuff like human welfare or human impact, brand reputation, all kinds of things that are a little squishier than just engagement. Right. And that's what we have to think again, like how do we deploy this stuff in a way that it doesn't go off the rails and cause unintended consequences.
When you travel the world now and you think about your role as both an entrepreneur and a scientist and a social scientist, really, a person who really cares about the world, what are some of your frames around your favorite applications that you're getting engaged with now? You talked about healthcare and the billion people who could really be served by a problem that's not possible to scale with just humans. What are some other areas that you're the most excited about or feel the most promising to you right now?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of human impact, I'm really excited about a project. I don't have a particular advisory company in the works, but education.
Yes.
It's another one of those 2 billion people kind of problems. And there's already, and again, AI people have been thinking about this for decades.
Very long time.
There's a thing, if you're upper middle class person, you can hire a tutor for your little kid, for your high school student. And the evidence is overwhelming that if you have a human tutor that's good, they get a sigma improvement in learning performance, which means like a grade, letter grade or better, at a standard deviation in a Gaussian distribution.
Yeah, orders of magnitude.
That's a pretty good edge just from having hire some. And so AI people have been trying to make intelligent tutors for decades. Just like Siri couldn't happen until 10 years ago, this couldn't happen until now. But now I'm telling you, the technology is all lined up. You can do it intelligent tutor now, these large language models, because the models can actually sit on this side of our desk, like they can do the same task the student does.
Yes.
And they can also sit over the shoulder of the student and watch the student do the task and then diagnose and make sense of it. And those are the two important things that need to be, to make a tutor. So that's a big application I'm super excited about. There's also sort of general information seeking, like for instance, why we use Google today. We use Google as our kind of our library. Well, and then of course we have this whole like bifurcation of truth-seeking media and propaganda media and how that works. It's kind of scary out there. But for the truth-seeking side of society, people who actually believe in the science and evidence and so on, there's several companies that are working on how to make use of the AI, the best AI, to optimize our use of the world's information. So for instance, a company called Premial that they're working on like how would a researcher use a large language model to help make sense of the giant literature out there, scientific literature. A company called Erasmus.ai is working on how do you build LLMs that are optimized, fine-tuned for things like policy decisions for climate change. And that's $1 trillion spend. That's a big policy. And so you want to be informed, like what's the consequence of severe weather and over here in this period of time, all these kind of important policy questions. You don't just want to ask ChatGPT. You want a system that's designed for that kind of problem. And I'm really excited about potential there. We're going to see the greatest sort of information sources ever, the libraries of Alexandria, but custom fit for important problems that we have to think carefully about.
Well, I can't think of a better steward for the thought process and the evolution of this technology than coming from you, Tom. You've got a very big heart, in addition to the brilliance that coalesced to help start a revolution. And I'm delighted that you're so engaged in actually helping the world understand what this means and how they can have impact and frankly, take responsibility in ways that would be easy to just be a spectator on. So thank you for being a great teacher and a student of the development of AI and appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Mark, it's a real honor and privilege to be on your podcast, on your webinar. And I think we're really aligned because I've always noticed that you also show the way towards how can we do the right thing and still do well. And I'm impressed about how you've done that. So thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.